Greetings, I am Pillar Nexus, the Ancient Gladiator. Today I want to talk about how I look at games and think about designs. According to my grandma, I've been thinking up game ideas even in my youngest days. I still have a ton rattling around in my head even now. I'm thinking about testing out the ones from my vault someday. For now, I just want to talk about the elements that I personally like. Dice, polyhedral objects intended to be rolled to determine a result at random. They've been around for a long time, before recorded history even. Seriously, go on like Wikipedia. They have like ancient dice, especially this like D20 from Ptolemaic Egypt. Anyway, while the regularly numbered six-sided die is the one that gets a lot of use, it gets used in different ways for different games. Like for example, Stone Age uses six-sided dice as a means of gathering resources. You get a die per person you're sending to gather, and the total you roll is divided by the difficulty of that resource, difficulty to get it, and that's how many you get. Also, there are dice with different amounts of faces for more possibilities or less. I mean, the D-Force, for example, or even using coins is effectively a D2. Many RPGs use dice ranging from like 4 to 20 sides. There are specialty dice with unusual numbers like 30, 60, even 100. Formula D, for example, is a game that uses a variety of dice, and what's special about those ones are have numbers that are repeated on either the low end or high end, depending on the die. Like the D4 and D6 have a lot of lower numbers to represent slower speed, while the D20 and D30 have the higher numbers representing high speed. Really interesting are the dice that don't use numbers. Fallout, for example, uses three dice that show 0 to 2 dots plus an outline of a human form, representing where you're hitting someone in combat. But the dots are how many times they'll hit you in the process. Fallout's a game I'd like to revisit one of these days. About other things in games I want to explore, such as character design and development and combat. But anyway, what I like about dice is how much they can represent a range of possibilities, and each one could come up multiple times. A deck of cards eventually runs out of options, though some games find a way to do both with dice. Fuse, for example, has 25 dice across 5 colors, kept in a bag and drawn at random. The colors eventually run out until they're returned, but any number of them, um, any number could come up when rolling them. It's also just fun to roll dice. You know, just take a bunch of dice, shake them up, roll them, see what you get, and it's just entertaining to roll dice sometimes. Cards are another element that I like. Effectively two-dimensional. We can get into thickness later. Usually thick paper or cardstock. Objects that are shuffled into a deck and dealt, usually one at a time, and eventually run out of cards to draw unless something restocks it. Cards are another older invention, and really, if you just have a basic deck of cards or 2 decks of cards and mess with the contents, you have a lot of possibilities for just a fun time. Big game ideas with cards lately have included collectible card games. Buy a starter deck, buy some boosters, build your deck, trade for other cards, or go to someone who's selling cards and buy from them, and just build something that's just personally yours. Is a brilliant idea, but one that can be kind of expensive. There's also standalone deck builder type games as well. Dominion is a classic example of deck builders. But there's also Heart of Crown and others as well, where you start with a deck that is effectively the same as a deck that someone else is going to be starting with most of the time. Um, but then you're going to acquire cards somehow to give you more options as you play. StarCraft is one of the weird ones that uses a deck building system for developing your combat capabilities that you acquire through spending resources. Um, then there's weird approaches to, you don't get to build the deck. You buy the deck, it's already built for you, and you can't do anything about it aside from buying another deck. That game is called Keyforge. It is very much a maverick design of doing its own thing apart from what other games might be doing. And I honestly think it was an interesting idea. I believe they're currently fixing the algorithm and looking to bring it back, so I wish them all the best on bringing back Keyforge. Ultimately, why I like cards is, you know, there's very little possibility of repeats, like depending on the deck in general, because each card is going to be its own unique thing most of the time. I know some games allow for building a deck with 3 or 4 copies of a card, but the thing is, eventually those run out. How you deal with the depletion of that deck of cards is part of what leads to strategic depth and having to rethink your plans on the fly sometimes. Also, that whole secrecy of just, I have this hand of cards, you don't get to see it unless I actually show you, and you're not going to see it unless there's a reason for me to show you. You roll dice, it's out in the open, usually. But cards, that's your secret knowledge. And as I said earlier, just having a basic deck of cards just to mess around with, it's fun. Worker placement, a system of having individuals that you can assign to tasks to get you things that once you occupy that space, no one else can until the next round. Unless there are certain abilities, and there's a lot of craziness that can be introduced with, worker placement and special abilities that people can use to mess with things. In general, when you place your worker, you'll get um, either a static number of items or an accumulated pile of things. For example, there's Agricola with its add this much of a resource every turn spaces. There's also Lords of Waterdeep where in order to have those spaces that accumulate things, the players have to build them. And that's another interesting possibility to introduce with worker placement games is instead of having places that are there from the beginning or slowly added over the course of the game, having a mechanic where players can just put out their own places to send workers themselves or have other players send workers to those places. And in the case of Lords of Waterdeep, uh, a player builds a place, an opponent goes to it, the original builder gets a bonus. So that's another idea worth looking into. So what do I like about worker placement? Just the whole you can't have it all issue. You only have a few workers, and there's a lot of places to go, and your opponents are going to get there before you for some of the spaces, and you just have to be willing to adapt. This is this is a mechanic that will test your ability to adapt to a situation that's not always going to go golden for you. In fact, that whole, you know, gotcha, I got there before you kind of uh, player behavior is kind of fun in a way, even when it gets frustrating, because you can do it right back to someone else. And also, it's harder to stall in worker placement games. You know, you can't really hold back or waffle or do anything to waste so much time to keep the game from progressing forward. You have to place all your workers, and once everyone's done so, it's on to the next round. Wizard of Waterdeep kind of opens up some possibilities with its Waterdeep Harbor, in that, you know, after you play your intrigue card from going there, you'll get to reassign to another space. But it's not like the space you're going to is going to stall the game that much longer. Another mechanic that I like are auctions, where everyone's got resources and they're bidding them on things that they need more than the resources they're giving up for it. There's two like major kinds of auctions. There's the I'm going to bid, then this person's going to either outbid me or not. Then the next person's going to outbid whoever else was higher or not. Sometimes it goes around once. Sometimes it goes around multiple times until somebody settles on what they're willing to bid. Alternatively, there's secretly bidding, which is a little bit harder to strategize for. You have to like guess what you think it's going to be worth to you. Well, you know what it's worth to you. You gotta guess what your opponents are going to value it as. For simultaneous, a good example is Container, where everyone has their different card that says these containers are worth this much to them. These containers are worth this much to them, but it also has that balancing factor of you don't want to have too much of a certain type on the island, or you end up losing that type. You don't want to lose your most valuable stuff. Another factor in the auctions as well is whether you're directly bidding on something or for the right to be the first one to pick something. Planet Stamp is a good example of the second one. You're not bidding on a specific role card. You are bidding for the right to pick a role card before anyone else does. And once you get that card, no one else can take it. What I like about auctions are, first, you have to be able to understand value as a concept, and ultimately value regarding the things that are in the game. It's like you gotta look at this, you know, what you're bidding on is like, okay, this is really worth this much to me. But if I hold out and wait for something else to come up, then I know that's worth even more to me. And I'm sure I can get that at a better deal. And secondly, there's the whole, you know, just strategy of trying to outweight your opponents. Try to get them to spend more on something that you don't think is worth what you're going to get them to spend on it. 20th century with its disaster bidding, where everyone's bidding science to have the least damage from the disaster. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to make you bid as much of your science as you can, so you don't have as much of it at the end of the game for that bonus. But yeah, auctions are advanced strategy, advanced thinking in terms of um, decisions and what matters to you. Auctions tie into my last element that I enjoy, which are just like money, stocks, and business. Um, Money in general is a resource of exchange for the things you need that help with achieving the goals that you're trying to achieve in the game. And then there are stocks which have variable values depending on what actions are taken in the game. And it's just running a business in general is kind of cool, I think. Being able to run it in the safe confines of a game where the consequences do not escape into the real world is always a fun exercise. There'll be things like resource markets, where depending on how much of an item there is in that market determines its value. And if it's like Planet Steam, where you have people flooding the market with stuff and crushing the price, unless, people start buying those things to fill up their own stocks and help raise the price back up. But it's always a gradual process and it's going to take a while. Then there are things like stocks. There's the fairly basic stock system of acquire where you know you build the chain, then you buy the stocks, and you're trying to have the short-term stocks of, okay, this hotel chain is going to get eaten. I want to have stocks in this chain so that when it does happen, I'll have that bonus, or I'll have something I can sell off at that time to make money. Versus the long-term stocks of, I'm prepared to invest full into this hotel chain and hope that it's big at the end, so I get a lot of money out of my stocks. There's the 1830 system of stocks where you actually have to operate a business to make the stock worth more, and you're never going to be able to operate it on the first shot because you have to build your rails first. You do your runs, then you build. But if you're patient enough, eventually you can make it work. Unfortunately, people can then try to sell stock out from under you and uh, devalue your railroad. And then there's also just building an engine of I invest into making more of this and more of this so that for future turns I'll have these things available that I can apply to what I need to do. Terraforming Mars is a good example of building an engine to create what you need to get what you have to have. In general, I just like business as a whole. Um, so games with business and money and stocks and auctions and all that fun stuff of financial responsibility, planning ahead, and being very very patient appeals to me because it's a challenge. It's a great big challenge to think that far ahead, to try to anticipate how markets might change in the future. And like with auctions, it ties into understanding value as well. And there are a lot of business games out there. Um, I'd like to recommend some games as part of this. Um, Regarding dice, I recommend Fuse for demonstrating how to have both that guaranteed color, but no guarantee on the number. That's kind of a cooperative challenge. Um, with deck builders, I recommend Dominion, period, but I like Heart of Crown. That's too. I do hope more people can try those games. Um, Worker placement, of course, Lords of Waterdeep, since I still have the game. If you like farming as a theme and if you're a very patient person, Agricola also gets recommended for worker placement. There's also a game called Copycat, which does fun stuff with worker placement and deck building as well. Auctions, games like Infamy, with its you gotta pay a bribe to even place a bid, and even if you don't win the bid, you get your bid back, but what you paid to get into it in the first place is gone. So that's tricky. There's also 20th Century with its bidding on land, bidding on the disaster uh, systems. Let's see. And then just business games in general. Planet Steam. I miss Planet Steam. I really should get that one again. With its crazy market and um, having these areas where you set up your steam tanks to get you your resources. It's that one's pretty cool. Other business games, Container. Uh, Good luck finding a copy. Container is a great game for demonstrating what can happen when everyone at the table chooses not to be responsible with their money and blows it all on stuff like upgrades for their warehouses and factory machines. And yeah, there's a limited amount of money between the players that only gets increased if someone sells to another player. Then, yeah, Acquire as just kind of a classic game of stock speculation. It's one of the nicer ones because there's no way for a stock to go down. If someone acquires your chain, you have a chance to sell out your stock or trade it upwards. You can do the dangerous thing of holding onto your stocks and hoping that you can start that chain again. Because even when chains get bought out, it's possible to restart. But it is the closer the game is to ending, the bigger the risk it is. And then the stocks become worthless. But ultimately, I just love games, period. I think there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things that are worth checking out as, neat little ideas that deserve to be explored. What I should have mentioned in Dice was Quarriors. Quarriors is very cool dice bag building. And then there's Keyforge, which is an interesting idea that relies on an algorithm that is currently in the process of being repaired. Really, though, just if you see a game and it's not too much trouble for you to pick it up, try it out. You never know. It could be the greatest game you've ever played. It could not. It's worth taking chances just to explore new ideas, new things. But in the event that you want to choose more carefully, there's resources online for reviewing board games. Board Game Geek is the big one. Definitely check it out and definitely check out your local game stores. They could use more players these days. And with things opening up more, it's worth going to one and meeting some new people, making some new friends, and having a great time with tabletop games of all kinds. This has been Pillar Nexus, and I thank you very much for listening.